I'm not going to write the obituary of a physician yet. I think it's a very valuable profession. They add a whole lot of value to the entire healthcare ecosystem. I don't think the physician of the future can survive as a physician purely on the basis of his medical knowledge. Instead, he must be as technologically literate as he is probably medically literate. I think there's going to be the element of human intervention in healthcare that's going to continue to be there, but it's going to get severely enhanced. And I think that's going to be where the impact is going to be.
Thanks for coming on the show, Aju.
Thanks, Elijah. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Likewise. To get us started, for anyone who doesn't know your work, what you're focused on, and kind of your experience, do you mind just giving a little bit of background as to who you are in this world?
Thanks. Yeah, I'll keep it short. Grew up in India, grew up in Mumbai, which is one of the most busiest cities probably in the world. And then, went on to do my dentistry. So I'm a qualified dentist. That's my exposure to the healthcare industry. Quickly realized that I'm more a people's person than working in a clinic. So I moved towards management. I worked in multiple industries, primarily the ITS industries, media and e-commerce in the initial years. This is during the dot-com boom. As much as the boom happened, the bust happened as well very quickly. I then moved into insurance, and that's where I managed both health insurance and pensions for Aviva, which is one of the world's leading insurance players. And then about 18 years ago, with a few of my colleagues, we took a dive into entrepreneurship when entrepreneurship was not very popular. And we started a strategy consulting company called the Performance Factory that has four offices around the world: Bangalore, Muscat in Oman, Dubai in UAE, and of course, New York in the US. And one of my projects in the US was with a healthcare practice based out of Long Island. And, a few projects with them led to the entire understanding that there was a lot of gaps in healthcare. And we decided to build Kennar Health from that perspective. And so that's my pet project today, kind of ensuring Kennar is live already, but, it goes places. Apart from that, I work a lot with startups and both on the mentoring side and as well as being part of a co-founding team of a couple of other startups, some in the foodtech space and others in the fintech space. So primarily, if I were to summarize myself, I would put myself as a person who's obsessed with anything that is inclusive. And when I say inclusive, I don't mean, just ensuring members of society who don't have access to things. But by inclusive, I also mean ensuring that all the elements of data and information come together to make a product more intelligent and more effective. And that's the space that I'm obsessed with. So three things that actually I really love: sustainable businesses. I'm obsessed with everything environmental, everything on the ESG spectrum, everything on the fintech spectrum, and then anything and everything on the healthcare spectrum. And I'm seeing today, if you follow the United Nations Social Development Goals, you see a clear synergy between these two things coming together. And I think that's the one that keeps me more excited.
There's obviously a lot to unpack there. I want to go back to your first start into entrepreneurship and the shifts into employee into entrepreneur mindset. What was it that ultimately gave you the catalyst, the drive, the push, the itch, the pull, whatever it was, to shift over from the traditional path of entrepreneurship, of being an employee, into entrepreneurship?
Um, that's a very interesting question. I think it was boredom, and let me be very honest about what I mean. You work for a large organization. You're high up in the organization in terms of the kind of work that you're doing, as well as your designation. And then you realize that a lot of things are happening in these organizations, whether you participate in them or not, because they're built with large infrastructure. They continue to do things the way they want to do. They go on to capture new markets, come out with new products, and you become a less significant player in terms of making an impact. And I think at that time, impact was very, very important for me. And so, when we found other colleagues who had the similar mindset, I think that was the trigger for entrepreneurship. So I don't think when we entered entrepreneurship way back in 2006, 18 years ago, I don't think it was the lure of entrepreneurship or trying to make a lot of money, but it was more about, am I making an impact? And I think that continues to be some sort of a guiding North Star even today.
Were you afraid of failing and having to kind of go back tail between legs back to a job?
I don't think I actually thought about failing, Elijah, to be honest. But I must tell you an interesting story. I got married in 2005, and my entrepreneurial journey began in 2006, just a year later. And I remember my in-laws having a very secretive conversation with my wife, saying, "Are you sure this is the guy, and does he know what he's doing?" Right. So I think people around me may have been a little worried, but I'm not sure I thought of failure.
Yeah. It's something that I always am curious about with entrepreneurs because once you make the shift and the jump, I know so few people that have gone backwards back to being an employee for any sustained period of time. But I also know a lot of people who like the idea of it, but struggle with actually making that leap and making that jump. So I'm always curious with how does someone actually take the plunge, lean in, and what are the fears that hold them back? So thanks for sharing.
Sorry, I mean, I call all aspects of work employment in some form or the other, right? Yes, you are reporting into somebody else is paying you money, or you're making your own money. I think that's the difference between entrepreneurship and employee. As a consultant, as a strategy consultant, working with large organizations around the world, many a times some of these companies have actually offered me job opportunities, right? And some of them have been very tempting. I must mention, Elijah. And the only thing that you ask yourself is, are you going to be making the same impact that you were otherwise doing in what you're doing today? And and most of the times, I've found out that there is a whole lot of infrastructural issues that will probably encourage you to make those impact, but you may not be able to see it the way you want to. And that's when I've kind of pulled back at some point in time. So one of the reasons I ventured into the startup scenario, technology-based startups, has been specifically because I believe as a consultant, it's good to go back to the industry.
That makes a lot of sense. I think one of the things that I've been interested a lot about with strategy consulting, consulting in general, is with the advent of AI, the landscape is going to shift dramatically for how strategy consulting is done. It's one of the heaviest, at least from white collar jobs, one of the heaviest people focused industries of bringing in people to kind of do the work, do the preparation, do the reviews, do the strategy, do the meetings, do the decks. And so AI and Gen AI specifically with LLM models uh, leans into those industries, I think, the most to have some of the most disruptive impacts with the technology. Has this shifted how you do your strategy consulting? Have you seen other companies starting to adopt this or shift their relationship to strategy consulting in the past 2 years?
Oh, absolutely, Elijah. I think you're absolutely right. The consulting industry is going to be the most impacted industry, by the advent of AI, especially generative AI, because a lot of what we do is research and building intelligence for organizations based on which they can then decide what strategic pathway they want to take. That intelligence creation, that research capabilities are now easily handed over to good AI models. I keep telling my team that, a couple of years down the line, if you're going to be sitting in front of a laptop and crunching Excel numbers for a living, that job's not going to exist anymore, right? Because there's enough of that intelligence out there. So we're going to be known for our opinion, right? Data is going to be there, data is going to give insights, and therefore consultants have to be sure of what opinion they're going to give and how are they qualifying and quantifying that opinion. So I think it's a situation where consultants have to go back a little into the industry, understand the various elements of that industry, understand the nuances of that industry. And one of the most important things that I'm seeing today in consulting is that, and we've leveraged that very well at the Performance Factory, is that a cross industrial application. So there's something that's happening in hospitality that I'm able to bring it into manufacturing. There's something that's happening in banking that I'm able to bring it into aviation, right? So that kind of cross pollination, and so that requires extreme high level of intelligence among consultants. And so from number crunching, you are going to go into more thought crunching or ideation crunching situations as a consultant. So if consultancies used to have a whole lot of people doing, research work and number crunching work, I think we're going to see more expert level consultants, and therefore the numbers of people we're going to have in the organization is probably going to reduce.
So, Aju, I want to take kind of that perspective and shift into what you're doing with Kennar Health, and for just kind of painting the landscape within healthcare. Again, as a consumer, I've done a few different companies and helped with a few different products in the healthcare space. One of the things that I think everyone would agree, at least in the US market, is that it's plagued by poor processes, bureaucratic processes. It's very dense, it's very convoluted, it's very difficult to kind of understand what is going on in the industry as a consumer. So, where does Kennar Health kind of come into play in that space, particularly leveraging AI to achieve solutions that drive impact?
Yeah. So, when you talk about healthcare, I think everybody will kind of admit the fact that there are a whole lot of lapses and gaps within the healthcare industry, and this is not a U.S. story only. It's a global story, right? And of course, each market has their own challenges. In Europe, which is largely government-backed healthcare, the challenges they are facing are slightly different from probably what we're facing here in the US and in other countries as well. But let me go back into the history of healthcare. Multiple industries are now actually appreciating the value of data, right? And in some industries, data wasn't easily available. Uh, and therefore, with technology, they're seeing a huge rush of information that's coming in, because of which business models are changing and they're able to add value. Healthcare, on the other hand, even if you go years back, has always had data, right? It's always had data, but unfortunately, they were in silos, it was not integrated, and nobody brought this data together to make sense about the data. And that's one of the first issues that I see in healthcare. The second biggest issue in healthcare is that I think we've always looked at healthcare solutions from the perspective of who's paying for it, right? And so everyone who's in the healthcare space has been trying to build solutions from the perspective of who's going to eventually pay for this. And that usually ends up being either the payer industry or health systems or private practices. And hence, there's been very few build that's kept the patient at the center of healthcare. And any healthcare intervention that focuses on anybody else but the patient is going to get mixed results. So at Kennar Health, our entire focus and the entire founding team of Kennar is they're all practicing physicians, and therefore they have kind of actually lived the life of frustration within the healthcare industry. And the entire intent was, how do we bring the patient in the center of this entire conversation? How do we build a digital healthcare platform that involves the patient to participate in his healthcare journey and not outsource it to others? Because healthcare is not something you just outsource and you get taken care of. But at the same time, how do we make it attractive enough that its cost goes relatively low, and it's absolutely possible for payers and providers to pay for it, right? And there is value in that entire in that entire value system. So that was the entire perspective about Kennar. Keener's story went live around COVID time. Uh, we started building in about 2021. Our MVP was ready by 2023, and we went live with a few patients in the year 2023. And as we started generating the kind of information and data, we then started building the AI models over and above that to start providing insights into by accessing patients' medical records. So, and that becomes extremely valuable. And so that's a journey that we've had with Kennar.
So the cynic would argue that there's a reason why all the innovation has gone towards figuring out who the payer is going to be, whether insurance provider or a medical practice, and going after them versus the consumer, given that so much, at least in the industry today, is set up on that system where the patient doesn't even know how much things cost, let alone what tools are going to be used or having that choice of where their EMRs are stored or anything to that nature. So do you see this as a barrier? I mean, obviously it's a barrier to entry, but what is it about Keener that the hypothesis is it's going to be so compelling that you can shift this model to be more consumer centric and patient centric?
So the model is very patient centric, but the person paying for it is not the patient. It's still the provider organization that's paying for it. We are now having conversations with certain insurance companies and trying to see whether whether we can shift the payment for our solution towards the payers. So the workflow, the operating workflow, keeps the patient at the center of it, involves the patient a lot, but the payment for it is done by others, and the reason why they're ready to pay for it is because there's immense value that the provider gets when data is available at the point of care. And there's immense value the payer gets when the payer knows that the patient and the provider are coming together to provide an integrated care model. And what we see in the future and what we're hoping in the future, is that the payer will be able to customize premiums based on how a patient is actually looking after his own care journey.
I
So
mean, I think that's the model that I think everyone ultimately wants, is to have their data make real world impact, both on customized on what their plan should be, both from an insurance premium perspective, but also from a care plan and getting it as individualized as possible. Do you have an example or a for instance or a use case that you kind of talk through of how this is currently being done? Even I know it's early stages, but like what is a concrete example of having some of this data and then customizing that treatment plan with the patient involved in the conversation?
let me kind of give you a use case of what we've already witnessed in terms of how people are using Keener. In terms of customized premiums, we haven't reached that position yet. That's our our goal, our north star over a period of time. But let me just give you an example where Elijah goes to his cardiologist today, and the cardiologist has kind of performed a series of tests on Elijah, and it probably prescribed a few medications, and then has asked Elijah to kind of look after some aspects of his health. A few days later, Elijah has to meet his neurologist. And now, when you're in front of the neurologist wants to know what the cardiologist has actually advised you. At this point in time, as we speak, there is, at that point of care, there is an entire break of seamless care, because you would know the headlines of what the cardiologist told you, but you would not know the details. And the neurologist now wants access to your records. And so what happens is they would ask you to go back home, and their office then starts getting in touch with your cardiologist's office, and an entire bureaucratic process of trying to get information from each other starts. And it potentially takes anywhere between 10 to 12 days before information is literally reached both ends. And then one day the neurologist's office will call you and say, "Hey, Elijah, we have the information, so why don't you come in tomorrow or day after?" So you've lost approximately a couple of weeks while that care is broken down. By using Keener at the point of care, you have the ability to give the neurologist, because you are in control of this data. So you have the ability to give that access. So it's patient mediated access to the neurologist. And in a click of a second, the neurologist has access to your information or the data that the cardiologist has recorded within your health record. Along with this, from a patient perspective, the patient gets actionable insights based on, and I say actionable insights very carefully, because a generic medical record does not make sense to a patient, right? And it does not matter what level of educational qualifications that individual might have, because medical literature can get complicated, can get overwhelming, and it can run to many pages and might not make sense. So we take that information and make it actionable in such a way that the patient knows what are the things he must do to look after himself to keep him in good shape. So at the point of care, the provider gets access, and across the life cycle, the patient gets actionable insights.
Yeah, I think that it aligns from a perspective of what we expect healthcare to go towards, right? Is kind of having this layer of technology integrated directly with your primary
And that's
data.
exactly what.
Where do you see, yeah, where do you see, just from an industry perspective overall, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years from now, with the advances that we're having in generative AI, will we even need doctors? Will we even need the specialists to the degree that we do now? I mean, it's been this overburdened industry for such a long period of time, but I do think that we're going to keep having advancements in the capabilities of these models, and the more fine-tuned and the more custom that they are, they're already identifying and diagnosing diseases that doctors and specialists aren't necessarily able to pick up, and we're only 2 years into this technology. So where do you see, from a long-term perspective, this industry moving overall in working hand in hand with AI and having more and more access to custom data?
I'm not going to write the obituary of a physician yet. I think it's a very valuable profession. They add a whole lot of value to the entire healthcare ecosystem. I think a whole lot of things that we are building, what other digital healthcare players are building, and there's some amazing build that's going on around the world right now. I think they're all going to add a lot of value. They're going to completely support and complement a physician's abilities. Today, I think a physician, unfortunately, is bogged down by a whole lot of administrative and non care based activities. If those can be taken care of by some of the solutions that we and others are building, I think the provider patient relationship can definitely enhance itself. The patient himself now can become an important player in his own healthcare journey. If you recall, our healthcare journeys in the past, we were never aware of what was happening to us. We would just go to a doctor. They would tell us what potential problem was. Then they would give us a set of instructions that we need to follow. Some of us would dig a little deeper. We may ask friends and our relatives who are in the healthcare industry what some of these things mean. But I think today, standalone, a patient can have a lot of intelligence about his own health. And I say that intelligence must come from a place of accurate information. I don't mean just search and find kind of information, right? So for me, the physician will continue to be out there taking care of people, complemented and supported by technology. And I always call new age solutions as your extended staff. They're not human beings, but yes, they are members of the staff that support you. And so I think there's going to be the element of human intervention in healthcare that's going to continue to be there, but it's going to get severely enhanced. And I think that's going to be where the impact is going to be.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out, because I think it applies to so many different industries,
It does.
and it's one of those things where we can't see past, 6 months or 12 months or 18 months out. What do you think are second order effects of AI within healthcare specifically? And by second order effects, whenever there's a brand new technology, we immediately think of, well, how can this apply to what I'm doing today? Right. And so it's kind of taking what already exists, taking the models that currently exist, and saying, let me bring this new technology in to do what is currently being done better. And so you're seeing this within the space, as we've been talking about, of exposing more data, having more unstructured data that can be communicated, translated, understood in and through generative AI, right? And also just bringing in kind of disparate data and being able to unify in a more logical, complete way. But this is still kind of taking things that have already existed and working to stitch them together. There's always these second order effects that end up kind of happening 3, 4, 5, 10 years down the line, which are fundamental shifts in how we do something at all. So an example would be we used to not have smartphones, right? And so we used to call a restaurant to order food. And now there's kind of this entire ecosystem of being able to kind of do delivery of food. You can deliver packages through Uber, you can order a car directly to you. And so transportation has kind of shifted entirely with this new technology that was enabled by having a personal computer in your pocket at all times. So where do you think the second order effects, if you have any ideas on how that's going to impact just what we even know healthcare to be today?
Yeah, I think you rightly mentioned, we've already seen those second order effects in multiple industries, right? And like it's there in other industries, you will see it in healthcare as well. Um, Technology, and this is why I'm very, very impressed with what artificial intelligence kind of provides us. Technology has been evolving over a period of time, and we've always been told that technology is an enabler. It's an enabler to how you've been doing business or how you've been doing your managing your industry. AI for me is not just an enabler. I think AI is bringing across a completely new revolution in terms of how you are imagining your industry or how you are imagining your workflow. So for me, organizations that are going to take AI and kind of place them over their existing business processes are not going to find too much of advantages because you still insist that your process or your workflow remains the same, and you're looking for a little bit of an automation or a little bit of an intervention, potentially using AI. Instead, if you keep AI at the center of it and relook at the entire workflow or business process, you're going to have a brand new business model. And what does
Correct.
that mean?
Exactly.
So within healthcare, yes. So within healthcare, for me, that means today I am dependent on falling ill, then having to go to the physician's office, meeting with the physician, then him instructing me on what my issue is and how I should look after it, potentially pop in a few pills, and then hope that one day I'm feeling better. That's the workflow that we have in a very basic healthcare setting. If I were to alter that, I would say, why should I fall ill to even start looking after myself? Right? Can I have enough information that kind of indicates towards things that could potentially happen to me? And can I circumvent them before that incident actually happens? And then to do that, and eventually, if it does happen, do I really have to go into a physician's office? Can I be in touch with the physician through other means? Right? And can there be layers of care even before I meet the physician? And can I take care of that instance in multiple different ways before treating it as a situation where I have to check into a physician's office or to a hospital and then undergo treatment plans as a reactive mechanism versus a completely proactive mechanism? Now, we're seeing a few of these nuances happening with value based care in healthcare, right? But even in value based care, and value based care has been around for some time, but unfortunately, we are not yet seeing physician practices or ACOs, and some of the ACOs are doing some amazing work, but we're still not being able to see fully capitated models coming in where the practices are able to take on the full risk. And the reason they're not able to take on the full risk is because to take the full risk, you need good amount of data, good amount of factual data to be able to make those decisions. So I see a huge impact that AI will play. And I don't even say it's going to take too long. I want to say in the next 2 to 3 years, we're going to see that impact in healthcare.
That's a fascinating future. And it also reminds me of the fact that why do you go into the doctor's office? Maybe it's a little bit different with a hospital, but you go into the doctor's office so that they can get more data, right? I mean, ultimately, what you're doing is maybe they're tapping your knee or looking at your throat or looking in your ear or talking to you. But all that is data. And so if you're able to collect it remotely or in whatever way possible, and again, to your point, it has to be accurate data. So it needs to be factual. You need to be able to trust that data. But if all that data was able to be captured and synthesized, you can become way more proactive versus the current reactive model that we have.
Absolutely. And don't forget, one of the most important aspects of going into a physician's office or even to a hospital is the entire triaging system, where there's a good 10-15 minutes spent trying to know who you are, what your situation is, and why are you visiting us today. In fact, that triaging system can be done remotely in such a way that by the time you reach the physician or a hospital, everybody knows why you're here, and you can actually start directly with care.
Yeah, it's fascinating how inefficient it is for one of the most impactful things in your life, which is your health. Dr. Aju, if there was one last objective or impact that you wanted to have in the world, what would it be from a long game perspective? What are you focused on? What do you want your legacy to be?
Legacy, that's a very broad question, Elijah. Let me put it from the perspective of what we're trying to build. I think I definitely feel that healthcare has been an area of neglect, not necessarily because the players involved in it were neglecting it. It's simply because we did not have the bells and whistles that could bring the various elements of healthcare together. Today we have those bells and whistles, and it'll be a crime if we were not able to leverage on all of these aspects, both technology wise, information wise, data wise, and we're not able to bring them all together to impact human health. I always say this, the last person who has access or who understands his own health is the patient. Everybody else has access to the patient's data except the patient himself. So at Kennar, the idea was, how do we democratize that? How do we bring the patient back into the center of his own care? Right? It's not something you outsource. Right? And we are all fascinated by our financial planning. We all want to know how our investments are doing. I'm surprised we don't want to know how we ourselves are doing, right? And so that becomes the crux of what I'm hoping that we as Skinner and everybody else in the digital health space can co-create, and give the medical practitioners and the entire the staff within a healthcare setting enough tools and technology enabled aids with which they can make those decisions faster, quicker, and even insights that they may have not otherwise been able to get. Now, the only gap that I see in this, while we have the infrastructure set up, the overarching gap that I see, Elijah, and this again is something that I would, hope healthcare folks across the world pay attention to, is we got to relook at our healthcare education itself. Today, for a person to be a qualified doctor, uh, it requires years of study and effort. That could come down because a lot of technology can really enhance the ability of somebody becoming a physician in a faster time period. But also, it requires multiple people in the healthcare system, your nursing staff, your medical assistants, all a whole lot of them. Not just educating themselves in healthcare, but also educating themselves in technology. I don't think the the physician of the future can survive as a physician purely on the basis of his medical knowledge. Instead, he must be as technologically literate as he is probably medically literate.
That's fascinating. Thank you so much for coming on the show. If people want to connect with you or learn more about Keener, where should they go to connect?
Well, KennarHealth.com. That's the website. That should give you a good glimpse into what we are building and what we are intending to do. The product is now live in a couple of practices in Long Island. We intend to have about 50,000 patients on the platform by the end of this year. And we're continuing to build our AI models. That right now our AI model provides insights. Very soon we're going into understanding the claims ratios and getting into other aspects of. We're also trying to get into the social determinants of health. So you'll see some more action coming out of Keener. as we spread beyond. We are presently only in New York right now, as we spread across the country and probably to other medical practices.
Fantastic. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Elijah.